Josh Allen is an MVP finalist. Joe Brady is getting some interest from other teams. Brandon Beane delivered his year-end press conference, and we have some herd mentality items to get to, all coming your way today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Thursday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day. And as a reminder to you, we are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Today's episode of Locked On Bills is presented by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Well, folks, we have a lot to get to today. We'll start with some newsy items, then we'll get into Brandon Beane's comments that he made in his year-end press conference and try to dig into the most meaningful items that he shared, and then I have a few herd mentality items that I want to get to at the end of today's podcast. So let's get into it. We'll start with it being announced that Josh Allen is a finalist for the NFL MVP award. And I don't think he'll get it, but it's cool to know that he's among the finalists. And I think Patrick Mahomes will probably pull that in this year. But it's cool to see Josh get that recognition. Also, Sean McDermott was originally announced by the NFL as a finalist for Coach of the Year. So he was among the final 5, but the AP narrowed it down, and it's an AP award. They narrowed it down to the final 3, and Sean McDermott wasn't in the final 3. So we know that McDermott received enough votes to be in the top 5, but not the top 3. But nonetheless, some nice recognition for Allen and McDermott. As a reminder, those are regular season awards. So as you may sit here today frustrated at Sean McDermott or Josh Allen for the playoffs, all of that voting is done before the playoffs start. So just keep that in mind as you react to the names for all of the different awards. Joe Brady, the Bills quarterbacks coach, has been requested for interviews by the Jets and the Chargers for their open offensive coordinator positions. And this is interesting because I never really thought he would go to the Jets. Maybe if there was a quarterback plan that he liked, he would do that. But the Chargers certainly feels like a good opportunity with Justin Herbert and some good weapons there in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, Josh Palmer, a nice young player, some good young offensive linemen in Jamari Sawyer, Rashawn Slater, Zion Johnson. They've got some nice pieces there offensively. You could see that as an attractive destination for Joe Brady. And when it was reported that the Jets wanted to speak to him, I never really thought he would take that job. And I thought Joe Brady would have to ask himself some questions about, well, does he want to go take another offensive coordinator job right now? Or is he in line to be Josh Allen's offensive coordinator if and when Ken Dorsey ever makes the jump to being a head coach? And so I thought that was kind of some interesting dynamics for him to personally sort through. But I feel like that Chargers gig could really move the needle if they choose to offer him the position. You know, there's a lot of open offensive coordinator jobs across the league right now. And so it makes sense that Joe Brady's getting some consideration based on what he did at LSU. I don't really put a whole lot on him for the little more than a season he got in Carolina. I think he's a bright offensive mind, and he'll get another chance. It's just about the timing and the opportunity, right? And so we'll see if he does leave. It was recently reported through Adam Schefter that Davis Webb is interested in becoming a coach. And Schefter shared in that tweet that the Bills offered Davis Webb their quarterback coach position last year before he decided to continue playing with the Giants. That's something we talked about on the podcast last year at this time. If you've been listening since then, you know that Davis Webb was offered that job. That's new news to some people, not to us. And so if the Bills do lose Joe Brady, you feel like it's a very natural opportunity for them to go back to Davis Webb and say, you want to take it now? Because they gave it to him before they did Joe Brady last year. And so that's just some interesting dynamics to consider here if the Bills lose Joe Brady and they have to hire a new quarterbacks coach. All right, let's dig into the things that Brandon Beane said during his press conference. And we'll kind of do this a lot like we did the Sean McDermott press conference yesterday, where I'll share some of his comments and I'll weave in some analysis as it feels appropriate. He was originally asked about the need to add more around Josh Allen in the AFC arms race, obviously focusing in on Mahomes and Burrow and what the Chiefs and the Bengals have. Interestingly enough, Brandon Beane immediately started talking about Nyheim Hines and how he will have a bigger impact with a full offseason to acclimate to the offense. He did acknowledge that they have to be better. 10 points won't get it done. Did mention that statistically the offense was very similar year over year, this year and last year for the Bills, and then kind of continues to reel things back to the division. Now, we talked about the Chiefs, he talked about the Bengals, but just like McDermott yesterday, there was this reminder that, hey, we have to win our division. And even McDermott yesterday said, hey, the gap is closing there where, we know the Dolphins are better. We know the Jets are better. And the Patriots, maybe they're not better right now, but they've got a ton of resources. They got a ton of cap space. They've got a good amount of draft capital to help their roster this offseason. And so, it is about the Chiefs and the Bengals, but it's also about the Jets, Patriots, and Dolphins too. So let's not lose sight of that. You win your division, you host at least one playoff game. And that always matters. But when he was asked about the arms race, he started talking about Nyheim Hines. Thought that was interesting. Was asked if he had enough wide receivers and weapons around Josh Allen. Brandon Beane started off by talking about how good the offense was before the bye and how confident they were in what they had offensively. Said the second half of the season was not as good. It started with Josh getting his arm hurt. They hit more adversity with the scheduling. They have a lot of good players, but it didn't play out like it started. And so I think it's interesting. We all know that there was a moment after the bye. I really think it was the second half against Green Bay where the offense really didn't look right. It was in that moment. Josh had a couple goofy turnovers in that second half and, just didn't seem to have a lot of rhythm to it. And I think that kind of continued throughout the second half of the season. And so I would agree that it started off looking pretty good and then just never found any rhythm. It never really evolved. And you could see what it tried to do. It tried to become a more vertical offense, right? That's what happened. And I think they lost their rhythm along the way. They needed to be a little bit more balanced with that passing offense and how they attacked the field. Brandon Beane continued kind of talking about falling behind Kansas City and Cincinnati. He disagreed. Well, he didn't come out and say he disagreed, but he pushed back on the Kansas City piece of it. He did. And I do too. I feel the same way. He mentioned, of course, this is the first time the Bills played the Bengals. Obviously, they're a good team. And the Bengals didn't – I feel like people are thinking the Bengals snuck up. They played for the Super Bowl last year. They won the AFC and really led for a good amount of that Super Bowl. So, like, if the Bengals aren't a new thing, they were right there last year. And so I think they're the class of the AFC. It sounds like in some way Brandon Beane would agree. But Brandon Beane kind of came back to something that I think is important for us to be reminded of, and we'll kind of get to this a few more times throughout this conversation today. But he said, look, we won 13 games. We're a good team. We lost 3 games during the regular season by a combined 8 points. We don't get run out of the gym very often. We didn't have it the other night. They proved they deserve to move on, and we didn't. And then he kept kind of coming back to playing your best football at the end of the season and admitted that they never really got there. And he doesn't want to overreact to one game. And so for as much as Sean McDermott said yesterday, you are who you are in your last game, and that's something we've heard from Brandon Beane a lot throughout his tenure in Buffalo, there was more of a kind of a defensive mindset, not like defensive side of the football, but defensive in nature in the way that he addressed a lot of things, in my opinion. We'll get into that a little bit more, but he kind of wanted to, hey, look, we're a good football team. We've won a lot of games, not just this year, but over the last few. We don't need to overreact to one game. We don't get run out of the gym very often. And he referenced the Colts game 2 years ago as an opportunity where that happened and said, look, if this Bengals game happened in season, we would have taken it on the mouth, we would have studied the tape, and we would have figured it out. It just happened in the last game, and so we feel some type of way about it. Well, I think that's an issue in and of itself, but it is a reasonable amount of perspective to add to this overall conversation. On the salary cap, and we know the Bills right now are projected to be over the cap, but Brandon Beane started by saying, look, I don't know where the cap is right now for the next season. The YouTube TV money will have a big impact. Obviously, we know about this. DirecTV is no longer in control of Sunday Ticket. That now belongs to Google through YouTube TV. And there's going to be a big, huge, massive influx of money into the league that goes into the salary cap. So it's going to go up. I think this year it was 208. There's some projections that thinks it gets to 225, 230, even higher than that this year. And Brandon Beane said, look, we're in the $240 million range for what they're on the books for right now in terms of contracts against the salary cap, and said, look, we're going to have to make moves to get under the cap, and that doesn't include the 21 free agents, unrestricted free agents that exist right now, and that they're going to have to make moves just so they can get under the cap to operate. He said there's not going to be a Von Miller signing. We're going to have to get creative and try to win. Mentioned Terry and Kim give us every resource, and it's up to him to figure it out. They're not going into next year thinking that they are going to be less talented. Said they have to hit on draft picks and find low-cost free agents that can find roles, and they have to make the right moves. I think he's right about that. I appreciate his honesty. It feels like the last 2 years he's come out and said, look, we're not going to be big spenders. Well, last year they signed Von Miller to a 6-year, $120 million deal. And Brandon said, look, Von Miller's our big ticket for this year too. We're still paying him. So I don't know if I should believe him or not, that there's going to be or not going to be a big splash move. It sounds like there's a more volume approach based. If you take him at his word, it sounds like it's going to be more volume. Hey, we need to hit on draft picks. We need to find some low-cost free agents that can come in and fill meaningful roles. That makes sense, but we've heard this from Beane before, and it resulted in a lot of activity. So we shall see on that. On his impressions of the 2022 draft class, he mentioned, look, the better your team is, the harder it is for young guys to come in and make a bunch of plays. He said most helped in some way and that they will count on them even more moving forward. Talked about Kyer Elam as one of those players that they're obviously going to be relying on a lot in the future. Said James Cook got more comfortable as the season moved along. Mentioned Christian Benford started the season strong, then got hurt and wasn't really able to make an impact down the stretch, but it sounds like there was some satisfaction on what he delivered. And then mentioned Terrell Bernard as a key backup and special teamer as a third-round pick. We'll see what happens with Bernard. I'm not very optimistic there, but we shall see because they invested a day 2 pick on this player, and we'll see what the vision is. Right now, I kind of have a hard time figuring that out myself. The NFL playoffs, they are here, and we're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the number one sports book in America. That's FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers, join today to get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has all your favorite bets from the money line to point spreads to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Let's talk about some more of Brandon Beane's comments, at least the ones that I found to be the most interesting. On the defensive line post Von Miller's injury, he started off by saying, look, the group played well when Von was out there. Talked about the impact that Von has, how it frees up other players for some one-on-ones, and that you don't have a guy in the cabinet to replace Von Miller. And then he kind of talked about Greg Rousseau and how effective he was, and then he had the high ankle sprain. Wasn't quite the same after. Jordan Phillips, hamstring injury early, shoulder injury late, really kind of took away from his impact. He mentioned if they can find upgrades, they won't hesitate to add. But it feels like there was kind of an acknowledgement that there was some inconsistency, but also mentioned the injury stuff. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong about that, but it doesn't change that AJ Epinesa, Boogie Basham, very much underachieved. They continue to underachieve. And, Ed Oliver, for his status as a top 10 pick, being a good player, right? I think he's a solid starter, but is he a high impact player? Did he show up in the moments where the Bills needed him the most? I don't think he did. On Gabe Davis, another kind of defensive answer from Brandon Beane, talked about him being a full-time starter for the first time in his career, did some good. He said people are focusing on the drops. I am focusing on the drops, Brandon, but I'm also focusing on an incomplete skill set in a number 2 receiver role that limits your offense, but that's just me. Mentioned that he's a young player, finished on a strong note, and he said the same thing he did kind of multiple times last year, that nobody outworks Gabe Davis. He says, I trust Gabe a lot. Josh trusts him. Our coaches trust him, and that wherever he fell short this year, he would bet that he'll prove it right next year. So a lot of confidence in Gabe Davis in the messaging from Brandon Beane. So we'll see. We'll see on that. I would disagree with, I'm sure he is a hard worker, right? I'm sure he is. But that doesn't change that I think there's limitations to his skill set that limit the offense. Well, why did the Bills go to this vertical passing game? Probably because they don't have a complete player at their number 2 receiver that can win in the short to intermediate routes of the field with any level of consistency, and he has to win down the field. I think, as you consider, well, how does the scheme adapt to your players? Well, Gabe Davis is a size ball skills guy down the field and isn't a guy that uncovers quickly. Well, no wonder you don't have a consistent passing attack in terms of how you attack the field when you have such a limited skill set in that role. We'll see. Let's see here on Tremaine Edmonds and Jordan Poyer, both expiring contracts. On Jordan Poyer, he said, had some unfortunate luck with injuries, talked about him taking the drive to Kansas City, gave him a ton of credit, called him a pro, a lot of respect for how he's handled everything. They would love to get him back for sure, but they need clarity on the cap. Okay. Now let's contrast what he said there to what he said about Tremaine Edmonds. So again, unfortunate luck with injuries, took a van to KC, gives him a lot of credit. He's a pro, a lot of respect for how he's handled everything. Would love to get him back, but they need clarity on the cap. For Tremaine, first thing he says, he reminds everybody of their philosophy of draft, develop, and re-sign. All right, they drafted Tremaine Edmonds. They've developed him. Now they're going to re-sign him. Jordan Poyer, for as good of a player as he is, was a free agent signing. They're going to prioritize Tremaine. I really believe this. Some other comments on Tremaine. He said, these are real words that Brandon Beane said. Been amazing to watch his growth. Very proud of who he is. You can see his maturation. He's become more and more comfortable with leadership. He's a big part of our success coming in with Josh. We'll do our best to keep him. We'll look at the tag, but the number is high. Pretty obvious to me what's going to happen here. They're going to re-sign Tremaine Edmonds, and I don't know that it's going to be as sure of a thing with Jordan Poyer. My expectation is that Jordan Poyer will walk, and I think when you contrast the comments between what he said for Poyer and what he said for Tremaine, it's in Tremaine's court, just like we've talked about really all year when we've considered this Tremaine Edmonds, Jordan Poyer expiring contract situation. On Ken Dorsey, he said the offensive numbers are good. Said it probably felt like he was drinking out of a fire hose at times this year. Said he works hard, that he's smart. Ken has a growth mindset, and we will do our best to support him as he enters year 2. For anybody thinking that the Bills are going to fire Ken Dorsey, I don't think that's going to happen. He literally said we're going to do our best to support him entering year 2. So that's something to keep in mind there. On Spencer Brown, Brandon Beane did the thing I did yesterday and reminded everybody that he went to Northern Iowa, missed a season due to COVID, was drafted into the NFL, had back surgery in the offseason, missed all of the offseason, did everything he could to get himself ready to play in week 1, still was under-repped entering the season, said he played much better in the second half of the year. They have a lot of confidence in him. He's maturing and understanding the league. He said people that are critical of him, give him some due. The arrow is up. They're not going to give him a spot. They'll bring in competition. But he said, I expect Brown to answer the bell. And so that's a pretty clear indication to me that they're anticipating Spencer Brown back as the right tackle. Now, he's going to have to grow and develop, and I think there's a lot of truth to what he's saying in terms of reps, both coming into the league, during the league, coming out of your rookie season, having a back surgery that really keeps you out. All of that stuff matters. I think he's right about that. But it's still a situation where it's your right tackle position, and you want to have a high level of confidence that this can be, a sufficient starting level player. And I think at times Spencer Brown is, but at times he gets beat. There's times where I think there's mental lapses on where his eyes are when he's seeing different pressure situations. And so he's got to get better and evolve and play at a higher level. I'm optimistic that he can, but this is very much counting on some growth here. In a lot of ways, remember me a couple years ago really standing on the table and believing in Dawson Knox and being mindful of the context of his situation, the physical skill, the trajectory. I think you can apply a lot of that to Spencer Brown, but it's got to come together next year. It's got to, and there has to be competition. On Super Bowl windows, I like how Brandon Beane answered this. He said, we have plans to try and win every season. We're not modeling anything in the forecast that would put a date on when they're going to tear it down except for Josh. I appreciate that. And now, look, he said some smart things about, look, we're not going to put ourselves in a position where we're going into an offseason $100 million over the cap. And you see that. There's multiple teams that are kind of pushing that right now. But I tend to agree with, you don't look at it and say, okay, well, you have this 3-year stretch where your salaries all perfectly align, and that's your opportunity. And then after that, you have to strip it down. I don't think you have to, not with Josh Allen as your quarterback. So I like how he sees this. I do. On wide receivers, and was the question was framed if he's reluctant to take them early in the draft in the first round, because the highest drafted receiver that Brandon Beane has with the Bills is Gabe Davis in the 4th round. And the first thing that Brandon Beane said was, well, I chose Steph Diggs in the 1st round, which, yeah, he did. He gave up pick 22 and 2019 for Steph Diggs. But then he went on to say, look, he wouldn't hesitate to take a 1st-round wide receiver, and that if the player fits, he'd take them very easily. On Ed Oliver, he said he's done some good things and has grown, but there is some meat on the bone. Not from a lack of effort, but they expect him to find a little bit more, and Ed does too. Kind of the same way I look at Ed Oliver. Good starter, but is he a high-impact starter with the consistency you hope for? Not yet. Now, this guy's been in the league for a number of years, right? He's going to enter his 5th season. So, does he have a massive breakout in year 5? Like, what can we really expect in terms of the impact jumping up? Now, look, I don't think we ever really got a chance to see a fully healthy Ed Oliver with Von Miller, with Greg Rousseau, and I'm very interested in seeing that, of course, with Daquan Jones. Ed got hurt in that first Rams game, kind of played hobbled there. Then Greg Rousseau gets hurt, then Von Miller gets hurt, right? There's kind of some challenging dynamics there that took away from, I think, what this defensive line could fully be. But that's football, right? You can never count on everybody being healthy the whole time. That's not realistic. But I would have liked to have seen this D-line with a little bit better health when it comes to their premier players. On Devin Singletary, he said he's one of the most selfless people you can meet. They've loved him since day one. Very steady personality. Team first guy, will do whatever is needed. Commented on him improving his short yardage running this season, and his feel for the passing game has also improved. Called him a great pro. Obviously, Singletary, an expiring contract. I feel like the Bills would love to have him back. I just don't know if they can make that make sense in terms of a dollars situation, unless Devin Singletary takes a significantly lower deal than what I think he can get on the open market. I think that he's kind of priced himself into a $5 to $7 million a year range as a running back, and I don't know if the Bills are going to be willing to give him that, or he'd have to take a, less than market deal. We'll see. I don't know. I don't root for that. Small school, Florida Atlantic. He's been playing on a rookie deal for 4 seasons. He's earned his opportunity to make some money. I just don't know if the Bills can give it to him. On Josh Allen, he said the bar is so high for Josh. If he doesn't play an elite game, people said he should have played better. There were some turnovers, but you live with that a little based on how he plays and the wow plays that he makes. Said he's continued to grow. His leadership took another step, had another good year. And the only thing I ever get on Josh about is too many bruises. He wants him to take less hits and trust the playmakers, and the playmakers having to make plays. It's interesting that he wants him to take less hits, but kind of frame that through the lens of being more willing to trust the weapons, and of course the weapons rewarding him for that trust. When I think, I think there's some protection issues and some scheme issues that contribute to that just as much as Josh maybe being reluctant to consistently trust his playmakers. So I think there's some layers behind Brandon Beane saying, hey, I want him to have less bruises and take less hits. Well, I think there's a lot to it. There's a lot more to it than just Josh Allen being willing to trust his playmakers. I think there's protection issues and architecture issues with the offense that can be better to take some of that off of him. I hope you've been getting in on the action over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is my favorite daily fantasy resource. How does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. They have every sport, and entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It is that easy. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. So if you deposit 100, Prize Picks will give you 100. If you deposit 50, Prize Picks will give you 50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Let's get to a couple of herd mentality items to kind of close this out today. The first one is from Daniel, and it really fits well into the end of us talking about Brandon Beane's comments. Daniel says this. He said, I listened to the entirety of Beane's presser today, and I sort of felt he was being a bit more close to the vest than normal. He didn't reveal anything like he has in the past seasons. I feel like more changes are coming than we expected. One thought I can't get out of my head is whether the Bills will make a somewhat large trade of a player away from the organization. I feel like there are a few opportunities to trade away someone and gain some pretty good draft capital that allows more flexibility and ability to get cheaper and younger. Guys like Ed Oliver may yield something significant, and I'm not sure we can or should consider an extension. I think we know what he is. Perhaps a guy like Gabe Davis as well. In my mind, those are the 2 bigger names and in the last year of their deals, but even guys like Epinesa coming into the last year of his as well may yield a mid-day 3 pick. Do you foresee this happening? Maybe I do. I would agree with you originally with what you said here about Brandon Beane keeping it a little bit more close to the vest than normal, not being super revealing about some of his thoughts on the team and the direction of the team. A little bit different this year. I felt like Brandon Beane was very much defensive is the word I want to keep coming back to, where he's probably looking at people that are so down on the team right now is like, look, we just won 13 games. We won 37 games over the last 3 years. Had a Super Bowl caliber team now for the last 3 years. And it feels like there's this very sudden doubt that didn't exist 1 minute prior to kickoff against the Bengals. And obviously he said, look, they got blown out. But he kept on kind of going back to, like, I don't want to overreact to this. There's a strong nucleus. It feels like that was kind of the tone that I got from Brandon Beane was, look, I hear you. Maybe this isn't perfect and that's not perfect and this can be better, et cetera, et cetera. We just won 13 games. We won 37 over the last 3 years. We've been a Super Bowl caliber team. Like, I kind of get it from Brandon to an extent because like just the tone that like the game was played at 3:00, the tone at 2:59 compared to the tone at, when that clock hit all zeros, really different, right? And I think in some ways that's justified. I do. Everything I've said this week on the podcast, I mean it. But I do think that there is a level of it's not as bad as you think it is. The Bills are still a really good football team with one of the best players in the league in Josh Allen that's had a lot of success, and that it doesn't need to be a situation where so many people are calling for so many different people's heads in the organization right now. I can respect where Beane came from that. And I do think when he talks about being creative, he could be kind of affirming what you said here, Daniel, about maybe there's some players that they can unload for trades. But I think the creativity more comes from structuring of contracts, restructuring contracts, that type of stuff to get the most flexibility that they can. I'm not sure that they're going to be super interested in trading away assets, if that makes sense. But we could both agree there was a different tone from Beane this year than I feel like there's been in the past several years. The next one comes from VA, who says, do you think having an offensive head coach is better than a defensive coach? Feel like there is more offensive head coaches that are successful than defense. I don't put a whole lot into this, to be honest with you. I think it's about leadership over anything. I think unfortunately a lot of coaches get opportunities because of schemes, right? Hey, you are a really good offensive coordinator. You're a really good defensive coordinator. You had a lot of success. Now we want to talk to you about being our head coach, right? That's how it works a lot of times. But I think it really, more than anything, comes down to leadership, right? You need to be able to create a culture. You need to be the CEO of a football operation more than I care about your background as a X's and O guy on the offensive or defensive side of the football. I did a little inventory here on the defensive-minded head coaches in the NFL. And let's go through the list. Sean McDermott, Bill Belichick, Robert Saleh, John Harbaugh. He's not offensive-minded. He was a special teams coach before he was a head coach. So I'm putting him in this bucket as a non-offensive-minded head coach. Mike Tomlin, Mike Vrabel, Brandon Staley, Ron Rivera, Matt Eberflus, Dennis Allen, Todd Bowles, Pete Carroll. I think there's a lot of success there in the coaches that I just named. Sean McDermott, successful head coach. Bill Belichick, successful head coach. John Harbaugh, successful head coach. Mike Tomlin, successful. Mike Vrabel, successful. A lot of Super Bowls there that I just ripped off. Robert Saleh, we'll see. Obviously, that team took a major step this year in year 2. They need to get their quarterback figured out, but I like where they're headed. Brandon Staley, he's got kind of has to get out of his own way with some of his aggressive nature, but a lot of his ideologies are anti-defensive-minded coach. And that team got to the playoffs this year and certainly feel like they have a chance to be one of the better teams in the AFC. I'm not a huge Ron Rivera guy, but I think you can reflect on his tenure as a head coach and see a lot of success. Matt Eberflus, first year in Chicago, we'll see there. Don't love Dennis Allen. Todd Bowles, don't love him, but I mean, playoffs this year, he got the Jets to 10 wins during his time. We'll see there. Pete Carroll, obviously a very successful head coach. So I don't know that I buy into this ideology, whether it's offensive-minded or defensive-minded. I think you want a great leader that can establish a culture, and part of that is getting the right assistants around you to fill out your staff. So I know that you probably look at this and say, well, all the coaches in the championship round are offensive-minded. Well, okay, yeah, that's true this year. There's also a lot more offensive-minded coaches in the league. That's kind of where it's all trending right now. Everybody wants that next Sean McVay type coach, right? That's the trendy thing. But I don't see any reason why you can't be a highly successful football team with a defensive-minded head coach, as evidenced by the list of coaches that I just delivered. Last one here comes from Jeremy. Jeremy says, do you think the Bills will start moving away from paying core special teams player a premium, seeing as they have a variety of holes to fill and being up against the salary cap? I know their special teams unit has been consistently ranked as one of the best in the league for years, but it seems they could be allocating some of those resources to other areas. In your opinion, would there be a noticeable drop-off if Tyler Medikevich, Tywan Jones, and Jake Kumaro were to leave? So some thoughts here. I think ideally the Bills wouldn't have to pay those players, right? I in a perfect world, you feel like you would get everything you get from Tyler Medikevich in Balin Spector or Terrell Bernard. You get everything that you'd get in Taiwan Jones in whatever insert other player. I feel like they really believe in those players. And predictably, I don't think that they're going to make that choice. Think about the preseason. Tyler Medikevich, Taiwan Jones, they did not play in the preseason just like they're Josh Allen. In fact, Josh Allen played more in the preseason than Tyler Medikevich and Taiwan Jones did. They protect those guys at all costs. I think the messaging has been consistently very clear from Beane and from McDermott that they value special teams and they're willing to pay for it. So predictively, I don't think that will happen. I do think that there's a case to be made that as you're scraping here to fill out your roster potentially this year, that the money you're allocating to Medikevich and Neal in particular hurts a little bit, but I think they're willing to live with that for the trust that they have and the key roles that they fill on special teams. And we'll see what happens with Taiwan Jones. Is he going to retire? Kind of keep waiting for that to happen. Obviously, it feels like he's a player that means a lot to the organization, but I think the Bills will continue to prioritize this. I don't think that's going to be a change anytime soon. All right, folks, that's it for today on the podcast. Tomorrow's going to be a fun one. I'm going to be joined by Joe Miller, and we are going to do a podcast theme that we've done for the last couple of years where we rank the wins. We rank all 13 of the wins that the Bills had this year in terms of most satisfying to least satisfying. We'll also obviously catch up a little bit on the team. I'll ask Joe for kind of his general thoughts right now. So we have that and, some fun time reflecting on the best moments of the regular season. So come on back for that tomorrow. Don't miss anything. Make sure you're subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.